Sorry, before we start, can I just ask you to type in your question box whether you can hear me or not, because I think we might have a little technical issue. The volume might be very low. Okay, I believe everything is okay now. I'm going to do my introduction again. So good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on influencing styles for effective leadership. Our presenter today is Ian Moody, and I'll be handing over to him in just a few moments. But I'm going to very quickly just before that, run you through some housekeeping tips. The entire presentation will be available on our SlideShare page as well as on our YouTube channel. We will be sending links so you can view these at a later date, and we would ask that you allow us up to a week to be able to send you that link in the follow-up email. Please spare a few minutes at the end of the presentation to complete the post-webinar survey. We take these surveys very seriously, so I would ask for a few minutes of your time to do that. You will notice at the bottom of your control panel a question box which can pop out in order for you to type questions. As Ian's presenting, if you have any questions that you want to ask him, could you please type it in there? And then he will allocate time at the end of the webinar to answer them. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for coming, and I'll hand you over now to Ian.
All right, hello all, how are we? I hope we're all very well. If you don't know me, you can check out later on who I am. But we won't pass that, there's no need to sit here and explain that in any detail. Okay, influencing. Influencing is part of leadership. Leadership is part of management. You know, people talk a great deal of rubbish when it comes to management, leadership. Is there a difference? Is there not a difference? Is one thing the same? Is one thing different? What does it mean? Yeah, technically, if you want to write a book on the subject, you can explain that management is different from leadership. And you can explain that leadership is different from negotiation, and negotiation is different from influencing, and so on and so on and so on. And get very boring and very academic about it. But we're not here to be academic. We're not here to make those kind of interesting, slightly nebulous definitions make work and fit sense one author or another author's thinking. We're here just to run through over the next 45 minutes or so some of the key issues of influencing and how influencing may be used in the workplace, and how an understanding of influencing and a developing of influencing skills can help us to create better workplace environments. And beyond that, how we can learn to deal better outside of the workplace, etc., etc. So let's get into some of this. One of the most important things in life is the ability to create, to shape, to maintain good relationships. This is part of culture, corporate culture, the idea that the culture of an organization is based on simply the way things are done. Okay, so what do? We create the idea that we try to develop a culture that is forever developing, changing, i.e. what's commonly known as the knowledge-based organization. We can think of it in many different ways. One of the simplest ways of thinking of it is through a simple little acronym known as VAIN. We can think of the values that we have, the values that we hold dear, the values that we believe are important. V. A, the attitudes of the people, the attitudes that we have to work, to each other, to our customers, to our suppliers, to our colleagues, to our boss, to our subordinates, our attitudes. N, norm, normals, norming. What we believe is normal, what we believe is usual in our organisation, what we believe is acceptable. And finally, E, expectation. What do we really expect? What do we expect from one person or another one? We need to just have a look at something. We seem to be having a slowing network. Just one second, please. Okay, I hope everybody's okay on here because we do seem to have just a slight message come up on the system telling us we've got a network fault. Guys, could you just send me a message to tell me that you're there? Just say we're here, please, or I am here. I'll just pick you up on chat and make sure you're there.
They don't have a chat screen.
You know, okay. Right, yeah. Okay, well, don't worry. Guys, just write to me, please, on the question scheme. Are we still okay? Just okay will do. Okay, will do, please. Okay, yeah, I've had one. Thank you, Mohammed. I can see you're here. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, that's all right. I think then maybe it's something not to worry about. All right. Okay, so I don't want to read slides to you, so you'll get what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the idea of corporate cultures, or the idea of culture in general, values, attitudes, norms, expectations, and how we can influence these for the better, to get them better as we move forward. All right, excellent. Okay. Right, we'll move on. We can't talk about influence unless we talk about power. Power is a key element of influence. So a lot of people, power is a dirty word. Power isn't a dirty word. Power is simply using a base by which we can make something work. All right, so we can think about power in different ways. So there's such a thing as processual power. The power that we possess that is there within the organisation, it's gained by using the ongoing aim of developing and implementing strategies in the organisation, because it's a process. It goes through processes. There's the idea of institutional power, radical theories of power such as Marxist theory, obviously Marxism, the creator of communist states, insists that ultimately power must be constitutionalized through social or economic structures, through institutions external to the organisation. It's basically the kind of power that is used by governments to control people. Okay, or it's used badly by governments to control people. And then, of course, we have the internal nature of power, the organisational power, the power which is inside the organisation. The organisation has power within its own right. Okay, all these ways people believe it to have power. So we have different kinds of power. So just to get the understanding of, before we start, we need to understand the kind of power that is in use, the kind of power that is being exercised, so that we then understand how to influence that power to come with the right outcome. So moving on, you may say that we have overt power, covert power. The easiest way to think of this is an iceberg. The iceberg is in the ocean, floating along. The overt bit is the thing you see on top, the little bit sitting on top of the ocean. The covert bit of power is the bit that's sitting underneath the ocean, but it's the big amount of the iceberg. So there you are, you've got the ship floating along, it's the Titanic. Along comes the Titanic, we all know about that. Titanic sunk, but what sunk it? The bit on top or the bit on the bottom? So which is the dangerous bit? The bit you can see or the bit that you can't? So which is more dangerous, overt power or covert power? Which is more difficult to deal with? Which needs more attention to possess? Well, that's an interesting point. Overt power is very obvious because you can see it. It's transparent. It tends to use very direct tactics. So we'll use things like physical tactics, economic types of tactics, autocratic leadership styles. You do what I say because I am the boss. Logical persuasion. You do what I say because it's there, because it's the right thing to do. Why is it the right thing to do? Because I say it's the right thing to do. You do it because I say it's the right thing to do, and if you do this, I will give you a reward. Now there's a good little boy, now go and sit down. Overt power. Covert power. It's much more subtle, much more hidden. It's indirect. It comes up on suddenly upon you. Now, when we talk about power, it's more about withholding information, keeping back things, only giving the information that you want people to have. And therefore, by nature, some people get some of the information and some people get other bits of the information. You could argue it's a form of negotiation. It's a form of network. It's a form of group behavior. If you live in my group, if you're part of my team, you find out what I want you to know. But if you're not part of this group and you're not part of this team, you don't find out anything. That's what it might be. On the other hand, we have structural power. Structural power is the power that gets built into any situation because of the relationship itself. And it comes to organisation structures. It comes to the way that one person reports to another one, to another one, to another one. And the higher you are in the structure, the more power you have. Or maybe the more people that report directly to you, the more power you have. Now it's interesting. The most senior people in organizations have very few people reporting directly to them. The CEO will have a board of directors. There's probably only 5, 6 main board directors at the maximum reporting to the CEO. But each one of those main board directors will have a series of managers, senior managers, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reporting. But as it goes through the structure, they get more and more people reporting to them on a direct basis. So whilst you may think that the structural power favours the top of the structural pyramid, in real terms, it doesn't necessarily. There can be more power resting in the people at the bottom of the pyramid than there is at the top. It has been said in the past that if you want to find something out about the company, ask the receptionist, ask the cleaners. It's amazing what the cleaners know. The cleaners know so many different things. They have real power because all sorts of people talk in front of cleaners because they even forget they exist. Now most cleaners are not dumb and they're not deaf. It's just they have no obvious overpower. But they are, by the very nature of it, levels of power. Something to think about in general. Anyway, then we have the work of French and Raven. French and Raven are two people that looked at power in detail, and they came up with the 5 power bases. They started off with legitimate power, the power that you have because of your position. I am the boss, therefore I have power. The power you may have because you are an expert. Because you are an expert, you have a degree of power. You may have power because you have the ability to reward people, to supply resources to people. It may not have to be financial reward, but it may be the ability to supply a resource award. The resource award, maybe you can give them a bigger budget. You can give them more people. Maybe you can give them bigger offices. Maybe you can give them more equipment. Something, whatever it may be. Reverent power is the power of the person. It's the power that people believe is in someone. Not because of their position, not because of their level of expertise, but they believe is possessed by someone. And then you have the last form of power base, and it's deliberately left to last. It's the coercive power. It's the power of punishment. If you don't do what I say, I will make it hurt. You will pay. And that's why it's often called physical power. Now ask yourself this, which is the most powerful of these power bases? Legitimate power, expert power, reward power, reverent power, or coercive power? It depends. If you think about it, there are many bosses that walk around buildings telling you they're the boss. They don't need to say you're the boss. You all know who the boss is. Everybody knows the boss. He doesn't need a flashing light on his head saying, I am the boss. Doesn't need it. So legitimate power itself doesn't need to be explained. It exists. Experts, everybody knows who the experts are. The only problem with experts is people lose interest in them very quickly. Sometimes there's nothing more boring than an expert. Reward and resource power, well, it's a short-term thing, doesn't last long. Coercive power, dangerous. People may react to it for a short period, but only for a short period. So reverent power, personal power. Don't know how good your history is. It's 1916. The Battle of the Somme. One of the worst battles held in any war. In the trenches. For 2 years in northern France, the British and the French and the Germans hadn't moved. All they'd done was shoot bullets at each other. And slowly but surely, more and more people died. But nobody moved. So 1916, we had this famous battle, the Battle of the Somme, which is a river in northern France. And they decided, the generals, that they were going to have the great push. Every soldier in those trenches that morning knew they were going to die. Everyone knew they were going to meet their end, every single one of them. But they all got up and they all went over the top to their certain death. Did they do it because of legitimate power, because a general told them to do it? Did they do it because of coercive power, expert power, reward power? Or did they do it for the personal power? Did they do it because they believed that the man standing next to them would take care of them, would lead them on? Which way did they do it, and for what reason? Considerable research done on this subject. They followed the man next to them. History shows that 66,000 men died that day. 66,000 men. They didn't do it for the sake of the generals. They didn't do it for the sake of the experts. They went with a reverent power. They revered the power of reverence, the power of personal power. It's what religions are based on, is reverent power. Other powers, other researchers have added things like the connectional power, the informational power, and of course the negative power. Connectional power, okay, that can easily be understood as a type of either expert or reverent power. Informational power can be considered as the power of information itself, and negative is coercive. Information, a lot of people will now today say, this is everything. This is the things that matter. So power. We're beginning to get an idea about what this is about now. Influence, the use of power. Influence is the use of power. Okay, now, for those of you that are interested in the procurement and supply end of business activity, expert power is frequently talked about. It's the power of using experts, specialists to give advice and guidance. It's the power of giving a function, a legitimate authority. So who has the authority to sign something, to approve something? It's a discussion frequently had in supply chain activity. The reason that it's slightly different than many other business activities is because it is a service function within inside the organization. Frequently, they don't have direct given power, legitimized power. They have a form of power which is slightly different. So the reason for that slide was just for that reason and nothing else. So let's see. We look at the organization itself. The sources of power, the hierarchical power, the influence power, the control over strategic resources, the possession of knowledge and skills, control of the human environment, involvement in implementation all sorts of sources of power within organisations. Where do you see that? How do you know it exists? You see it because of people's status position, because of the way they have claim on the resources. One has a bigger budget than another. That gives power. Representation. One function of the business has more people working for it than another function. So it has higher levels of reputation within the organisation because of the symbols that they carry, the symbols that they have. One part of the organisation, I mean, a symbol could be anything. It could be a logo, it could be a uniform, but it might even be the quality of the office furniture they have. One part of the organisation lives in better offices, better quality offices than other parts of the organisation. Therefore, they have more power. One part of the organisation may have bigger offices or better meeting rooms, newer computers, better mobile phones. One may be using Apple and one may be using Nokia. All of these relate to power. Excuse me, just one second. One second. Sorry. Well, okay. Okay. Sorry. So we just keep, as I said a bit earlier on, we keep to get this very strange message keep coming up. It's not happened before. But anyway, it's gone away again now. So hopefully everything's okay. All right. How about external stakeholder situations? There are so many groups of external stakeholders. I mean, in simple terms, we have connected stakeholders and we have truly external stakeholders. But within those, many different types. Can stakeholders who have control over strategic resources have sources of power? Maybe strategic financial resources. So maybe we mean the shareholders. Maybe we mean, for example, the lenders, the banks who lend the organisation money. These are external stakeholders with control over strategic financial resources. But maybe we mean the customers who don't pay us, or the suppliers who don't supply us. They have control over strategic resources. Maybe we have stakeholders involved with the implementation programs of a strategy. So maybe again, we could mean customers, we could mean suppliers, we could mean our bankers, we could mean our shareholders. Maybe we could be talking about the people that possess knowledge or skills, like our suppliers, like our consultants. Or maybe it could be stakeholders who have internal links to our organisation. Maybe the power rests with the press, or the media, or the public. Who knows? The pressure groups. But there's so much power through these various external stakeholder groups. And again, it's going to depend on their status and how important they are under different circumstances. It's true to say that the circumstances, the power that one group will have will be different depending on what happens and what is happening. One of the most powerful stakeholders you can have is actually the press and the media. They have considerable levels of power. They can't wait for something to go wrong. They can't wait to report what a bad job you are doing. And they will report that power because it sells newspapers and people like to read the stories. But the power they are exerting is they're going to influence people on whether to buy your product or service. They're going to influence people on whether they want to go to work for you. They're going to influence suppliers on whether the suppliers want to supply you. They're going to influence the banks and the lenders on whether they wish to lend you money and at what rate they will lend it to you. They will influence the shareholders on whether they wish to keep their investment inside your organisation or not, because they are carrying out influence and they are very, very, very strong. Most organisations are terrified of the press. That's why they have media departments, public relations departments. That's why organisations employ people like PR consultancies. That is why they have the public affairs team. That is why they spend phenomenal amounts of money on programs such as CSR, corporate social responsibility, sustainability programs. That's why they make corporate movies and videos. That's why they put out advertising to tell you what great guys they are, just in case somebody suddenly makes a bad report about them. And then they'll say, well, actually, it isn't our fault, because that power can destroy. So when we think about power and external stakeholders, be very, very careful and don't misunderstand. Remember that some of them are dependent on you as a resource. The shareholders don't want to talk about bad things because they've invested their money. You are a resource to them. But the press don't depend on you as a resource at all. Some of these things will have to have negotiated arrangements around, and so on and so on. So different issues related to sources and indicators within power, and how different stakeholders may impact upon you, and how they may influence other people. So control, and how control works. What is control? I mean direct control. It's using orders, instructions, direct supervision, rules, regulations, standardization and specialization, using bureaucratic control or planning systems, clear definitions, goals, objectives, policies, etc. Influence, trying to shape people, trying to get people to think about what should be done, trying to get people to bring their values into lines with the values of the organization. The organization has a mission plan. It creates a mission plan to explain its organizational vision, that is, its strategy. It then creates a value statement to tell the world what they believe is important. From that, it then tries to influence people to think its way, to tell people why it's doing what it's doing. It then sets performance targeting KPIs to measure whether or not it's actually happening. And then, of course, it puts in levels of control, especially there as areas of motivation. Motivation is a tool that means many things to many people. But in reality, motivation is a tool to influence the quality of people's output. However, like many managers have in the past, many managers still do, misunderstand motivation. A manager cannot motivate anyone. It's not possible. But they can influence people to become motivated. They can supply motivators. They can give people tools. But the sadness is, whilst they can't actually motivate people, while they can't actually motivate people, what they can do is demotivate them by misusing their power, by misusing their ability to influence, or misjudging their amount of influence they have. They can use it badly. So managers must exercise self-control. Okay. All right. What we try to do then is look at how power is dependent upon other people. So in a simple way, we have a matrix, and we try and track it. We work on the importance of what is important to one, to what degree is it important to the other. All this is saying is this: if the resources that person B has are of high importance to person A, and if the importance to persons B resources to persons B, A are to persons B, then they're both interdependent on each other. But as it changes, one becomes dominant over the other one. And the others, in the case of them both being low, there are no dependencies at all. They don't care what happens to each other. So in the bottom left-hand corner, where A and B simply do not view that the other is important, then both of them will act independently of each other. But in the top right-hand corner, where they believe both of them are highly dependent upon each other, they will start to act in each other's advantage or to each other's advantage, and vice versa in the opposite corners. This is a very, very important factor. So we can track what people believe the level of dependency is. Now I hear other people say to me, how do we do that? Well, my comment to that is come on a training course and I'll explain it in detail. However, for the sake of now, it's simple. We use questionnaires, we use observation, and we use reports. So there are many different ways in which we can gather this information, but the detail, frankly, would take far too long to go through in the amount of time allotted to us. But there are many, many ways. But one of the biggest, most important aspects, never to be forgotten, is observation. And for that reason, I want to move on reasonably quickly because I'm trying to get more into that area now. Okay, power in supply chains. I think I will miss that, having put it in. Positive uses of power. Positive uses of power. Expert power may be used to develop and empower suppliers, for example, to get suppliers to do what we want them to do. Reverent power may be used to share and benchmark best practices, to secure and eliminate risk in our supply chain, to get sustainability standards adopted. Reward power may be used to exercise responsible influences throughout our supply chains, maybe to secure compliance with desired sustainability standards. Maybe reward power may be used to develop required capabilities and sustainable standards. Maybe reward power may be exercised responsibly by, say, a buying organisation, for example, only these examples, through fair and sustainable pricing, rather than trying to push and force people into doing one thing or another. Pick supply chain and supply chain examples. In case anybody doesn't know what supply chain is about, supply chain is business. People think supply chain means buying. No, it doesn't. I think it means purchasing. No, it doesn't. Supply chain is the business process by which we manage the risk of the movement of goods, materials, services, resources, people, and financial elements from the supplier through to the manufacturer, from the manufacturer through to the wholesaler, from the wholesaler through to the retailer, from the retailer through to the public, to gain efficiencies and the best competitive advantage for our organisation. Therefore, by definition, supply chain is concerned with materials, goods, people, services, resources, buildings, premises, and financial aspects. It is business. Supply chain is the management of businesses. Commonly misunderstood. Yeah, sure. Buying is part of supply chain activity, but so is financial management. So is HR management. They're all part of supply chain activity. People misunderstand supply chain. Anyway, moving on. That's another subject as well, maybe for another day. Influencing and negotiation then itself. We talk about influence and negotiation. They tend to talk about it in the same word. It's not the same thing at all. Influencing is not a single event or even a series of events. What it is a continual process. Negotiation, on the other hand, is a single event or a series of single events, but it is not a continual process. Influencing does not need to be intentional. Children influence parents. The baby influences the mother from the moment the baby is born to give the baby milk. It's a process that goes on and on and on throughout life. Anyone who has had children, who's got young children, whose children have become teenagers, or in my case, become young adults, will know exactly what I mean. They influence and they continue to influence, and it never stops. Think back what you did to your parents, and so on and so on. It never stops. It's a human reaction to try to gain power. We influence to gain something, but it's not always intentional. It happens whether you intend it to or not. Sometimes it's even subconscious, but it still happens because it is a natural human process. Influence doesn't need you to confer. It doesn't need to be two-way. It doesn't need to give arguments or debates. Influencing just happens. Influencing can happen with a look or a stare. You can influence people remotely. As I've said, the newspapers in one country can influence somebody on the other side of the world to do something. The media can influence people in different parts of the world. Influencing need not end with a joint agreement. You don't have to get agreement. In a negotiation, you do. Negotiation ends with an agreement of some kind or another. You may end up with an agreement to move away, but at least it ends with an agreement. But influencing doesn't need to do that. In influencing, there needs to be no compromise. There needs to be no movement. Influencing just is. Now, I've made it clear that we all influence. I made it clear that we are all being involved in influencing all of our lives. The question is, are we good at it? The question is, do we know how to do it? Do we know how to influence properly to exert the desired power that we wish to use? That's the question. So, first of all, we need to think about the objectives and the outcomes we want to try to get through influencing. Are we trying to get resistance? Do we intend that the influencees will put themselves into a position of requesting, attempting, having to avoid to comply with what we want? Or are we trying to get compliance? Is that what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to go even further than that? Are we trying to get full internal agreement from somebody? Now, these aren't the same things. For example, somebody can comply to say they will do it, but it doesn't mean they've actually been doing it because they really believe it's the right thing. And that's a very different thing. Now, I was speaking to a manager here 2 days ago who said they've been having a problem getting people to do what they want. Well, that's a very common problem. The question is, how have you gone about doing it? Did you set out to get resistance, compliance, or internalization? Did you expect to get internalization? Normally, it's very rare to get internalization. It's very difficult to get internalization. Back in 1916, when those 60,000 men went to their death over the top of the back of the Somme, most of them were influenced to comply, not to internalize. Very few people would deliberately go to their death. Maybe we could think about this in a slightly different way. Maybe we could think of it as adopting an approach of pulling or pushing. In a push approach, in a push method of influencing, you exert power and authority over other people. The influencees know that you're doing it. They see, they feel, they know it's happening. And that is what you do when you want to get compliance. Usually it's used to overcome resistance. The pull approach is different. That's when you persuade. Use an interpersonal style of influencing. It's the most effective way of doing it because normally people don't know you're doing it. They just start to be aware that they're giving you commitment, but they don't know you're trying to get them to do it. So you could argue here that the push approach is about positional power, as explained by French and Raven, legitimate power. It's about possibly even coercive power. You could argue that the pull approach is about reverent power, as explained by French and Raven. It's one way of thinking about it. So what we're doing is we're using two different approaches, but it depends on what you want to get. It should be obvious to most people that the long-lasting, the best way to develop cultural change, the change in which people think, the way in which people change their values, their attitudes, their normal behaviour, and their levels of expectation, the vain aspect, as I discussed, is through the pull approach. That if you can pull on them, they come to you. If you push on people, there's only so far they will go. Interesting way of thinking of it. So it should be easy to realise that what you don't want to do, and as I was speaking to this guy earlier this week, they were trying to use a push approach of influencing on their team, and their team were going so far and then stopping. They were going it the wrong way. The question everybody is asking inside their head, even if they don't verbalize it, is what is in this for me? What do I get? Everybody starts that way. They never start by saying, what's in it for us? Normally, they start with what's in it for me, and they end with what's in it for me. What you need to do is get in the middle, what's in it for us. So if you use a push approach, all you're doing is telling people what's in it for us and what's in it for them at the beginning or the end. You don't complete the circle. The circle process is what's in it for me, what's in it for us, what's in it for me. With a push approach, you only get 2 of 3. And that's why most of the time it won't work, because it's only going to be 66% complete as opposed to 99% complete. If you use 3 of 100, of course. All right, so you've got push, you've got pull, which works better. So what you want to do is gain people's commitment, but people don't need to know you're doing it. They say that the very best leader is the leader that doesn't let anybody know they're a leader. The best leaders are people who don't even recognize that they're being led, which is interesting. So what does this mean? Communication skills. The way that you develop the ability to influence people is through communication skills. The use of different kinds of questions. Questions that are designed to get people to talk. Open questions. Not closed, open. Tell me what you think. Explain how this makes you feel. What would your idea be? Not we will do this, won't we? Get it to support. And as people answer, then you can use leading questions. And you can use comments like, yes, that's fantastic. I really agree with that. Tell me, if you were in this situation, how do you think you would manage it? What would you do? And you lead people to the outcome. They will always go where you want them to go if you take them through the journey. But if you use that big coercive stick, if you play the game, I have the legitimate power because I am the boss. If you play the game, I know best because I am the expert, the sources of power base, you will only take them so far, and then they will stop. Don't overload people. Don't try to tell them too much in one go. So when you have a complex argument to use, only say the bits that need to be used. The simple fact of life. If you want someone to remember something, use the rule of 3. The first thing you tell them, they don't hear. The second thing you tell them, they don't remember. The third thing they tell them is the one they will do. So put the things in order that you need to say and adopt the rule of 3. But never, 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 ever use a rule of 4. These are tricks that have been used so many times. They're used in literature. One of the most famous speeches by William Shakespeare starts with friends, Romans, and countrymen. The point of the speech was some people deemed themselves to be friends, some didn't. They all were Romans, but what he wanted them to believe was they were all his fellow countrymen. So countryman comes last, because countryman is the rule of 3. You belong to this country. You may not be my friends, but at least you belong to this country. So think as my countrymen. It's very clever, it's very well done. Those tricks are used all the time. All right, summarizing each section. When you discuss something, summarize it. Now the reason you summarize in sections is use a system known as banking. You get agreement as you go. You put it in the bank, it's there. You can now move on to the next point. You also use it to reinforce the understanding or to make the argument stick. You ask for feedback each time. Tell me what you think, what you would do, because that makes sure that you've understood what they are thinking. Not that they've understood what you're thinking, that you have understood what they are thinking. Be sensitive, be willing to move, be able to flex. To use verbal and non-verbal situations and signals. It is absolutely vitally important to understand that 70% of communication is through non-verbal communication, which makes a bit of a nonsense of what I am doing here today, because obviously I cannot achieve that, which means that if you're still awake, I have to thank you for your incredible attention. I'll move further forward. There's a guy called Yuckel. So I'm just being shown the clock. I'm aware of it. The guy called Yuckel, actually 2 guys, Yuckel and Faber. And they looked at this. They looked at different types of method, tactic for going through influencing. And they said that there's a rational, logical way of doing things, where we use a system of rational, logical persuasion. We use logical arguments and we use evidence to support it. The idea of using inspirational appeal, appealing to the influencee's ideals and values and aspirations. The way of perhaps using consultation, asking for the influencee to participate in the planning, the demonstrating, maybe taking into consideration the influencee's ideas and concerns. Ingratiation, getting the influencee to think well of you or be cooperative. Exchange, offering to give something back, reciprocal behaviour, giving something for helping you. Personal appeal, appealing for friendliness or loyalty. Correlation, seeking the help of others. Legitimating, making sure you establish a legitimate request or reason. And finally, pressure. So for example, you're in a meeting. This will work whether you're in a sales meeting, supply meeting, whether you're in a meeting with a member of staff, it doesn't matter. Let's take maybe a supply meeting. As I sip of water. A supply meeting. Let's start at the beginning, rational persuasion. You would make a comment like, for example, obviously, you know that you should give me my 5% discount because then you will be able to get this business. And as you know, in the past, when you've given me 5% discount, we've always appointed you as a contractor. Then you could move on to inspirational appeal. Of course, we would like to give you this business because I know that you are looking for promotion. And of course, if you continue to win this level of business, it's going to help you with your promotion. Consultation. Perhaps you can help me to work out a way in which we can deal with some of the problems we had last year. Ingratiation. Look, you know that I'm your friend. You know that I want to help you. You know how I feel about you. So you know I've always got you at mind. You know that, don't you? Exchange. Look, if you do this for me, I'll see if I can work out an extra contract for you. Personal appeal. Look, it was great. It really was great being at that conference with you last month. And I so much enjoyed our time together over lunch. You know, perhaps we could do that again sometime. It would be fantastic if we could spend more time together. Correlation. Perhaps there's other things we can do to support and work with each other in the future. Legitimating. You know that, of course, I only have the power to do this if we agree today. Pressure. If you don't agree with this today, then I think I'm going to have to go elsewhere. The system, the influencing tactics, using in order, starting from rational persuasion and ending up at pressure. Pressure only when there is no further option, when nothing else is left. Moving on. Sorry, stuck. I'm stuck here, sorry. It's like a problem here. The button's stuck. That's right. Okay. There was a guy called Caldini who said the work of Yucca and Fable and their tactics is interesting and great. Actually, we can simply look at it psychologically. Why do people react well to influencing, and why do they act badly? Well, they act well because every time somebody does something to someone, the answer is, what's in it for me? So what are they going to give back? What do I get from it? Reciprocity. Commitment and consistency. The desire that people have to be seen to be consistent. The desire that people have to be seen to stick to their ideas, to not change their position. So actually very strong. Authority. The desire that people are willing to be led by those that they believe have more authority than they do. Social validation, that they believe that by agreeing to things, they become part of the group, part of the team. Social validation is a very strong psychological reason why people get influenced. That is why people get influenced by the idea that you are in my club. We support the same football club. And so on, and so on, and so on. It's incredibly strong, and it explains a phenomenal lot of reasons why people will do things as groups that as individuals they would never ever even consider doing. And in fact, many times, things that people will do as groups, if you ask them as an individual, they would be disgusted by. Scarcity. People can do things purely because there aren't any opportunities. And of course, the need to be liked, the need to be loved. Moving on. You can use rapport, mirroring techniques, picking up on each other's technical words, using colloquialisms and metaphors to tell stories, using other people's dominant ways of expressing things, listening and using active versions of what people say back at them, finding topics of common interest, emphasizing on things that you agree on. Only ever discuss things you agree, not the things that you don't agree. Because once you get people saying yes, they won't say no. If you can get yes, 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 I agree, no problem, no problem, yes, absolutely, when it gets to the final one, they will say, okay then. But if they start by saying no, no, they keep saying no. Even when they agree, they will keep saying no. It's known as conditioning. Remember to use people's names. That can be very difficult, I admit. But names at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Never forget it. Always use people's names. But be careful with the name, please. And don't forget, in different cultures, different uses of names are offensive and can be offensive, and be very careful. I'm often called Dr. Ian. I actually don't like it. My name is Ian. I don't like Dr. Ian. I don't like Mr. Moody. I like Ian. And I tell people that when I first meet them. I tell them, please use Ian, but they don't, because they don't listen. And it starts to make me feel somehow I am in a difficult position. It makes me uncomfortable. So guys, if we do meet, please call me Ian if you don't mind. Anyway, so much detail to come here. We're moving towards the end here now. I realise I'm using your Q&A time up drastically as well, but there is a lot to cover. NLP, people talk about NLP all the time. You can go on NLP courses if you like. I don't recommend it. I seriously don't recommend it. Most so-called NLP practitioners have been for a course that lasted for 24 or 48 hours, and they think they know all about NLP. No. No, no, no. NLP is the whole study of the way in which we are neurally pre-programmed to react in certain ways. Now, without going into all of it, let me just pick up the last part. The intentional use of language to shift thought and behavior patterns. We have certain ways in which we respond to information, and we are programmed to do so from the day that we're born. We can't change it. That is to say, we either respond well to visual stimuli, auditory stimuli, or kinesthetic stimuli. And kinesthetic was the ancient word in Greek for kines, to feel or to touch. So people that are highly auditory will use auditory words. People that are highly visual will use visual words. And people that are highly kinesthetic will use kinesthetic words. So for example, a visual person will say, I see what you mean. An auditory person will say, I hear that. A kinesthetic person will say, yeah, I feel that's okay. But however, people often are a little bit of a mix of two of these, or even they might be neutral. If you test me, I'm a neutral, so I don't use those words. I use words like understand. Yeah, I understand that. I follow you. And I say it all the time. I know I say it. But if I said to somebody who was kinesthetic, do you understand? They'd be offended. Because they would feel badly. They would feel I was somehow trying to suggest they were stupid. Of course I understand. How dare you be so rude to me? People do it all the time. Now you need to be taught how to do this. You need to learn how to use what is known as fact theory, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic use of words to understand predilectates, the way in which we're predilectated to behave. You need to be taught how to create positioning within words and frameworks. You need to know how to change and reframe positions. You need to know how to mentally rehearse what you're doing. You need to know how to set paces and to mirror. You need to know how to process and vary information channels. You need to understand this whole subject, and it's a really major subject. But other than these technical things that you can read in books, and you can ask me, and I can give you lots and lots of stuff, this stuff you need to be taught, and you do need to be taught. And it should be not a subject of an NLP course, or please, God forbid, an emotional intelligence course. It is all part of the same story. It's about effective communication. It's about communication with people to acquire desirable levels of influencing. You can learn how to use influencing during negotiation. In fact, you should. And if negotiation doesn't include influencing, you shouldn't do it. Because it should. Because influencing is everything. Influencing is an element of leadership, managerial behavior. And just in case nobody knows this, my final comment of the day is the word to manage comes from the Latin manus. Manus in Latin meant hand. To manage something or somebody is to give or lend a hand. You do that through influence. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry to have gone slightly over. End of webinar. If there are any questions, please let me know. If you can't think of anything now, we'll pick them up later. Okay, thank you then. We will say good evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.